Our first panel this afternoon will address efforts to counter Israel's influence in various venues, beginning with college and university campuses. So I'd like to open by introducing Tariq Radi, a Palestinian-American organizer based here in Washington, D.C. Tariq graduated with a B.S. in finance from George Mason University in Northern Virginia, where he was a founding member of GMU's Students Against Israeli Apartheid, or SIAIA. He is currently the Public Affairs Coordinator at Georgetown University's Center for Contemporary Arab Studies. Under the umbrella of the Arab Studies Institute, he is leading an initiative to mine historical and contemporary documents related to the Palestinian Solidarity Movement in the United States. The work will culminate in a series of databases aimed at studying the US-based movement and offering researchers and advocates alike a critical resource. He intends to pursue graduate school with hopes of conducting research on resistance economies. Please join me in welcoming Tariq Radi.
So before I begin my talk, I'd just like to thank the Washington Report and the Institute for Research for hosting today's event. Thank you to Delinda and Grant for the invitation and all that you all have been doing, to the staff that made today possible. And I would especially like to thank the workers of the National Press Club that have been working so tirelessly to make this venue such a nice venue that we're sitting in today. So, as you walk through the main atrium of George Mason University, censorship on the panel. Okay. Okay, so let me start over. Hopefully that doesn't dig into my time, right? As we walk through the main atrium of George Mason University Student Center, you'll notice two parallel rows of banners splitting the cafeteria in two. But, the banners that you'll see are things that you'll kind of expect to see at any university, slogans of, patriot pride, advocating for the different university services, things like that. But there's one banner in particular that always seems to catch the attention of passersby. Because of our banner's presence, one might assume that historically George Mason University has embraced a politically radical climate. But you only need to go back 3 years to see that it's quite the contrary, actually. And what I'd like to talk about today is it's going back in these 3 years and observing this shift in discourse in Palestine, and also the emergence of student groups that are committed to radical politics. GMU Students Against Israeli Apartheid first formed as an ad hoc committee during Israel's Operation Pillar of Cloud. While an SJP chapter already existed on our campus, they were ardently anti-BDS and thought protests to be too radical. Now, this is a symptom of being within the Beltway, something I called Beltway syndrome. It also could be attributed to a number of other factors, obviously. George Mason University is one of the 5th most militarized campuses in the US. So there's a lot of things that contribute to this. To discuss the effects of Beltway syndrome will take an entirely different talk. So we set out to establish an organization that would address the issue of Palestine without making appeals to authority. Come January of 2013, we had completed the requirements to become a registered student organization, and all that was left was to wait for our application to be approved. From its inception, SIA faced tremendous discrimination from the GMU's administration. Every action we took on campus was met with immediate response from the administration. Now, before we were ever granted our club status, we were actually threatened with termination. Now, the administration's tactics to silence critiques of Zionism can be divided into 2 phases. The first phase being an outward denial of rights without plausible justification, and the second phase employed a series of policy reforms that aimed to circumscribe the agency and reach of our group on campus. Now, these repressive tactics exercised during the second phase would reveal a set of double standards applied to Palestine solidarity groups that we see constantly on different campuses. Excuse me. For this reason, I believe it's important to examine these policies and challenge these reforms because they aim to centralize power within the administration. And by doing that, administrators are able to prohibit movement building of any kind, whether it's Palestine-related or in terms of for other groups. Now, ultimately, this would So basically, this would end up backfiring on the university. As they started to restrict all of these policies that were aimed to restrict SIA, what ended up happening is it created a political consciousness amongst the student body. And before I end my talk, I'm going to come back to this a little bit and discuss some of the larger challenges of social movements on campuses today. While I believe that the double standard for Palestine exists, and I think it's very real, that threat, I don't want to exceptionalize our cause. I think the issue of Palestine is representative of a change that threatens the status quo and encompasses values that could destroy the foundations upon which repressive institutions are built. So with that, let me start. One of the first steps we took to change the political climate at GMU was initiating an educational program. We believed that education was a necessary component to engaging and politicizing the student body, and that without it, they would not participate in our political actions. Now, despite not being a student organization with access to space, we hosted weekly meetings in a small study room in the library. As students began to feel empowered through the readings, word spread, and eventually we could no longer cram into these small study rooms. Now, because the university had frozen our application, we were forced to meet outside. While this was an inconvenience, it actually turned out to be a subversive act that would fuel the university's overall discomfort by our existence. We see that here. Our outdoor meetings were a public display of a growing movement to reclaim space, even if we didn't realize it at the time. And again, this is not exclusive to Palestine. We felt this subversive act in Ferguson, in Baltimore, in response to the National Guard's curfew. We watched this unfold in the protracted process of the Arab uprisings, and we were inspired by the students at Mizzou who made their voices heard in front of the administration. And there are countless examples of this changing tide that is occurring, not just on campuses, but globally. Now, through this educational program, the students became empowered to challenge their professors and peers who either supported Zionism or claimed neutrality. Because we refused to normalize with Zionist groups on campus in any way, we were accused of being dogmatic and divisive. Now, institutions, whether they be academic, nonprofit, they often try to hide behind this idea of objectivity, which actually entrenches a culture of mediocrity and actually supports oppression, and seeks to protect the status quo. As Fanon asserts, for the colonized subject, subjectivity is always used against him. But we need not be colonized to have objectivity serve as a tool of repression towards us. And I say this so that we always question ourselves when we attempt to be objective in these circumstances. Keeping this in mind allows us to be aware where we stand in terms of power. And through this analysis, we were able to cultivate a culture on campus that not only rejected Zionist normalization, but challenged the residual effects of objectivity, one of them being victim blaming. There are a lot of other intersections that we can address. In the case of GMU, our commitment to anti-normalization served to isolate Zionist groups on campus. During my time there, the only time Zionist groups would emerge was in response to Palestinian organizing. And because we refused to engage with them in official fora, much of the campus community rejected the false parody, of Israelis and Palestinians being on equal sides and kind of the myths of Zionism and the origin of the project. Now, I attribute much of SIA's success, in the first year at least, to our dismantling of this false parody. But education for the sake of education alone is not enough. If you're not putting people and galvanizing people into political action, you're really just pontificating and sitting in these rooms. And it's fun to talk theory, but we wanted to see a material change. We wanted to see ways that we can actually support our allies, where people can feel empowered and have agency. So the first thing that we started was our Sabra campaign, which was to de-shelve Sabra on the campus's cafeteria. And as we collected hundreds of signatures, the university continued to crack down on us, but we were unwavering in our efforts. One of the repressive tactics the administration deployed was to restrict the campus, the areas on campus that were considered free speech zones. Eventually, the only area on campus that was considered a free speech zone was in the middle of campus, which if you could imagine trying to flyer or organize in the winter, how difficult that would be in DC. And again, this is talking about this idea of reclaiming space. I want us to think about that throughout this talk. You know, who is here? Who do you listen to? Think of this idea of reclaiming space. And then, you know, eventually, despite the administration's disapproval, we weren't able to deshelve Sabra completely, but we were able to offer an alternative that actually severely affected the sales of Sabra on campus. And, you know, it's something worth mentioning. Especially, it was a way for students to kind of support us, you know, like buy Sabra, you know, buy Hummus Tuesdays and stuff like that. Now, certain students took notice of the administration's repressive policy reforms aimed at circumscribing our reach and agency on campus. And as a result, students who may not have been initially interested in the question of Palestine joined SIA as they saw Palestine as a vessel to address larger issues in America today. At this point, we realized that SIA needed to have a more intersectional understanding and analysis of the effects of Zionism and its role in global capitalism and oppression. And as we know, again, there are way too many intersections for me to talk about in this one talk. So I'd like to focus on how we began to better understand Zionism's proximity to power and capital as we began to call into question the neoliberalization of the university. So our next major action would be a walkout of graduation, and this would actually be my graduation. Now, the university announced that Israeli businesswoman Sherry Arison would receive an honorary Doctor of Humane Letters at winter graduation and be delivering our commencement speech. Now, yeah, I know. I feel like Rubio up here with the water. While GMU's president Angel Cabrera attributed Arison's honoring to the example she set as a morally responsible investor, it's far more likely that it was due to her $3 million endowment of a professorship named after her business model. Now, while Arison claims to be a socially responsible investor committed to values-based business and morally responsible ventures, an investigation of the operations of her company reveals she invests in firms directly involved in the illegal occupation and colonization of Palestine. Arison's family's wealth was built through the direct dispossession and oppression of Palestinians. Now, as we outlined in an open letter to the GMU community, the honoring and speech given by Arison at graduation made it clear that the university was not concerned with the experience of Palestinian students and families who have been affected by this woman's or family's presence. Now, but more important than worrying about this question of how did Palestinians feel, because really, does anybody ever care about that? The administration has stated that the professor I'm sorry, let me slow down, everyone. The more important than this is we brought up the idea of donor aid and influence on curriculum. And this is what started to galvanize people on campus who didn't really even care about Palestine. The administration has stated that the professor of the endowed chair will be dedicated to research and education as exemplified by Arison's vision. It's deeply troubling to think that an apartheid profiteer can gain a direct line of communication to, you know, do these values to the student body. And without going into that story, we were able to do the walkout on graduation, and the university actually facilitated it. And I walked out of the commencement speech with 30 friends and 100 or more so in the crowd, and then we walked back in and received our diplomas. So it wasn't that we were punished, which was really nice. Again, that wasn't the university being nice, that was them being more afraid of like what we would do if that didn't happen. So I think there's something to be said about having rad politics on campus and not making appeals to authority and constantly trying to appease the administration in negotiations. Now, the question of donor aid would ignite a discussion surrounding faculty governance, centralization of power, and the role of the administration on campus. The question of Palestine was no longer solely a critique of Zionism, rather it was a lens in which the campus community could begin to understand power dynamics on campus. And for this reason, I now understand, after witnessing student movements on campuses throughout the US, that the administration's backlash against Palestine advocacy is not unique. Rather, it was the typical response of power to those who seek to disrupt the status quo. And from here, I would like to shift our conversation and take the opportunity of such a large and engaged audience to offer suggestions, but more importantly, raise a few questions that hopefully we can all work through as we leave this conference. I'll continue to use GMU as a case study just because that's where my experience was grounded. So in terms of organizing on campus, one of the ways we responded to oppression we faced was through mirroring the tactics of trade unions. We made sure to make every single instance of repression or any violation against our rights, the smallest slight, the biggest deal. And this might seem like we're picking benign little issues, but the sum of all of these issues is much greater than than if you were to add them individually. And I think there's something to be said about that. Now, in thinking through how students organize and our interactions with the faculty after the walkout, I began to understand the relationship that should exist and had flourished in the past between students and the faculty. For instance, at GMU, much like other universities, the faculty in regards to self-governance have as much power basically as students. They really have no power to enact change within the university's policies. So I'd like to quickly rewind to one of our past victories when the American Studies Association passed the resolution to endorse the academic boycott of Israel. So this was right before the university facilitated our walkout, where they implicitly acknowledged that Arison's presence may be offensive to members of the GMU community. The administration's response to the ASA boycott resolution embodies the discomfort that institutions and power feels as they watch marginalized communities reclaim space and advocate for self-determination. After the resolution passed, GMU's President Cabrera made the following offensive statement: "Universities exist to build bridges of understanding, not blow them up." His line, saying this, insinuates that being in solidarity with Palestinians is on par with terrorism. Cabrera's use of this damaging language was a blatant response to the support SIA received from faculty who endorsed our walkout on graduation. Now, I'd like to read a small excerpt from a statement we released in response to Cabrera's opposition to the boycott. Cabrera's most recent action is a deliberate attempt to stifle any form of faculty organizing on the GMU campus. Today, we are fighting for the faceless Palestinian academic, but tomorrow, we may be demanding better working conditions and pay for you and your colleagues. For this reason, President Cabrera opposed the ASA's resolution, because the former will lead to the latter, and the latter is an administrator's worst fear. It would only take 1 year for us to witness this prediction come true. Two prominent figures on our campus who actually had very close ties to SIA, and again, we have no way of proving these types of forms of discrimination because the university is not transparent in any way, so we're not able to prove it, but it's clear. When you see somebody, speaking at our first Israeli Apartheid Week, when you see the ODIME director supporting us and seeing that because we are a movement that is inclusive of everyone, that they should support us and not isolate us like the university had tried to do in the beginning, we can start to see that, you can see the change that it has on campus. Now, we can observe that all it took was one small group of students. We started as 8 people, just causing constant noise all the time, no matter what. Whatever we could, we were just reclaiming as much space. And even the voice and the noise, that is a part of reclaiming space. That is putting out your affect, right? If we're talking anthropology. And today at Mason, it's a very different campus. SIA is no longer hosts our meetings in these 4-person study rooms. The African and African American Studies program generously allows students to use the Paul Robeson room for their weekly meetings, which is really a beautiful room, and it's a really beautiful sight to see students talking about these things in a room named after Paul Robeson. Now, for instance, the Student Senate, before the emergence of SIA, they passed a resolution condemning Sodexo workers and university staff for going on strike because it was an inconvenience to students. That's to show you how conservative this university was, that even the Senate is passing these types of resolutions. Just last semester, they passed a resolution to abolish Columbus Day and to replace it with Indigenous Peoples Day, and I think that's a really big deal. And these are just a few of the very small instances of how we were able to change campus climate through Palestine work. And it wasn't always about Palestine, and I think it's important to note that. Now, thinking about this, I'd like us to envision all of us as a part of a larger effort to reclaim space for marginalized communities and for those who have been pushed to the fringe. If we come at these challenges that we're facing with this attitude, it will help us fully understand the attempts to thwart growing grassroots activism, whether that be in the form of an anti-BDS bill, repressing students on campus, or the disgusting attack on Rasmia Oda. All of these things are one and the same. They challenge power. It's important that we fight tooth and nail against the backlash facing Palestinian activism. I'm not saying this because I'm Palestinian, but because what happens next will reflect how those in power will address social movements at large. By challenging these notions of power, we illuminate larger questions of knowledge containment, governance. We begin to ask who defines boundaries. I'm not going to go into this, but issues of civility that we saw with Stephen Salaita's case. Maria can speak much more than I can on that. As a social movement, we should constantly be asking ourselves about issues of access and inclusivity. To be honest, part of me wonders why I'm here today. I feel really upset that I'm actually breaking up a panel of all-female panel. It's the only one that's here today. At the same time, I'm Palestinian, right? I'm a Palestinian man. There is a dehumanization of Palestinian men. There's an infantilization of Palestinian women, categorizing them and collapsing them with children, right? These are things that we're saying we need to ask what type of voices are allowed to speak and start addressing these types of questions. And the organizers are doing great. I'm just saying that we need to think about these things. We should always be constantly pushing the envelope. Thanks. And I'm almost done. I know I have 15 seconds. So, if our work isn't grounded in anti-imperialist, anti-racist, feminist, queer liberation ethics, we must ask ourselves, what is the point of what we're doing? We're working so hard to hopefully create a new world. Let's break free from the paradigms that we've been put in, right? We can do it outside of what we've been told the ways that we're supposed to do. We need to ask, who are the people that we're making appeals to, right? Is it important to have everyone in the room? These are just questions that I'm trying to build for the movement. In closing, I just implore us to always challenge, who is in the room, who are we giving voices to, how do those voices address power? And I think if we do this, we will undoubtedly dismantle the institutions that are built upon our oppression and that seek to protect the status quo. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Tarek, and please don't feel guilty. There were no women on this morning's panel, breaking up all-male panels, so you are welcome here. Our next panelist is Maria LaHood, a Deputy Legal Director at the Center for Constitutional Rights, with expertise in constitutional and international human rights. She works to defend the constitutional rights of Palestinian human rights advocates in the United States. The cases she's worked on include Davis versus Cox, defending the Olympia Food Co-op board members for boycotting Israeli goods, Salaita versus Kennedy, in which she represented Professor Stephen Salaita, whose offer of a tenured position at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign was withdrawn for tweets critical of Israel, and CCR versus DOD, seeking U.S. government records under the Freedom of Information Act regarding Israel's 2010 attack on the flotilla to Gaza, about which we will hear more from Huwaida Araf today. Maria works closely with Palestine Legal to support students and others whose speech is being suppressed for their Palestine advocacy around the country. She also works on the Right to Heal initiative with Iraqi civil society and Iraq veterans, seeking accountability for the lasting health effects of the Iraq War. Her past work at CCR includes cases against United States officials, such as Arar versus Ashcroft, Al-Awlaki versus Obama, and Al-Awlaki versus Panetta, the last two concerning the targeted killing of American citizen Anwar al-Awlaki, against foreign government officials, such as Matar versus Dichter and Belhas versus Yalon, and against corporations, such as WeWa versus Royal Dutch Shell and Corrie versus Caterpillar, which sold Israel the bulldozer used to kill Rachel Corrie. Prior to joining the Center for Constitutional Rights, Maria advocated on behalf of affordable housing and civil rights in the San Francisco Bay Area. A graduate of the University of Michigan Law School, she was named a finalist for the 2010 Public Justice Trial Lawyer of the Year. We're very pleased to have Maria LaHood join us today to discuss legal challenges to advocates for Palestinian rights.
Thank you, Janet. Thanks, IRMAP, and thank you to the Washington Report for putting on this terrific conference today, and thanks to all of you for being here. I want to especially thank Tarek for his work. People ask, where is the hope for change in this country? And I present to you Tarek and all the students who are advocating for Palestinian rights. That's where the hope for change is for me. As the movement for Palestinian rights has grown in the US, so too have concerted efforts to silence any criticism of Israel, particularly on US campuses. Students are being stymied, investigated, and disciplined, faculty are being punished, and activists have been sued and arrested. I'm going to focus on a couple of those cases, the first one being that of Professor Stephen Salaita. He is an esteemed Palestinian-American professor and prolific scholar, including on Zionism. Professor Salaita was a tenured professor at Virginia Tech University and was offered a tenured position at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign in its Native American Studies program. He accepted the offer, he resigned from his tenured position, and was set to start at the U of I in the summer of 2014. His wife quit her job, they put money down on a condo, they pulled their son out. Hello. Thank you, sorry. His classes were listed and his textbooks were ordered. That summer, the summer of 2014, Professor Salaita, like many, watched with anger and horror as Israel devastated Gaza. He tweeted about it. Just 2 weeks before he was set to start at U of I, he got an email from the chancellor, essentially telling him not to bother to show up. She said that his appointment would not be recommended for approval by the Board of Trustees, referring to a provision in his contract that his appointment would be subject to approval by the board. Professor Salaita and his family were left without jobs, income, health insurance, and a home. How did this happen? A self-described Zionist had been monitoring Professor Salaita's tweets. The right-wing blog Legal Insurrection published some of them, and groups like the Simon Wiesenthal Center, the Jewish Federation, and the Anti-Defamation League got involved. And wealthy donors to the university threatened to withhold their donations. Before deciding to fire Professor Salaita, the chancellor went out of her way to meet with those wealthy donors. Yet she didn't bother to consult Professor Salaita, the hiring committee that vetted him, or the department he was joining. Chancellor Wise and the trustees later admitted that their decision was based on his speech, claiming they viewed his speech as uncivil. And a couple of the trustees also called it anti-Semitic. As we know, the subjective label of incivility has historically been used to demonize groups and to suppress dissent. And labeling criticism of Israel anti-Semitic is a common tactic used to attempt to silence it. Board approval, by the way, happens in September after new faculty have already started teaching. And it's always been a line item vote where everyone is approved at once. Not so with Professor Salaita. Led by the chair of the board, Christopher Kennedy, the trustees voted to reject his appointment. The Simon Wiesenthal Center later awarded Kennedy its Spirit of Courage Award for leading the board in firing Salaita. So CCR and our co-counsel in Chicago sued the university, the trustees and top administrators, seeking Professor Salaita's reinstatement and damages. They had violated his First Amendment right by retaliating against him for his speech. They violated his due process rights by failing to give him notice and an opportunity to be heard, and they violated his employment contract. The university argued primarily that he didn't have a contract because of this clause. The court, however, refused to dismiss the case, finding there was clearly a contract. If there weren't, the judge said, the entire American academic hiring process as it now operates would cease to exist. No one would quit their jobs and move to a new place on a meaningless offer. The court also found that Professor Salaita's tweets implicate every central concern of the First Amendment. It was political speech in a public forum, and the university's actions were based on its content, which could not be separated from the tone, which is what the university had argued. It's not his views, it's the way he said them in a 140-character tweet. The chancellor resigned a few hours after the decision was issued. The next day, The next day, it came out that she and other university officials were using personal email for university business that they didn't turn over in response to Freedom of Information Act requests. In fact, an email from the chancellor revealed that they were using their private email because of the threat of litigation, and that she was even deleting her emails. The provost resigned a few weeks later. Last fall, Professor Slida became the Edward Said Chair at American University of Beirut and was ready to move on. He ultimately settled his case for $875,000 against the university. It was, I think, a victory not only for academic freedom, but for the Palestinian rights movement. One of the most inspiring aspects of his case was the incredible grassroots support for him. Thousands signed petitions, 5,000 professors boycotted the university, and 16 U of I departments voted no confidence in the administration. His termination was widely condemned by academic organizations, and the American Association of University Professors censured the University of Illinois. Professor Slida went on tour to speak on more than 50 campuses, finding a larger platform for his critical analysis of Zionism and settler colonialism than he had previously had. The movement for Palestinian rights cannot be silenced. But efforts to do so, unfortunately, are only increasing. Another case I want to talk about is the Olympia Food Co-op, which is a local food co-op in Olympia, Washington, home to Rachel Corrie and her family, and Evergreen State College, where she went to school. The co-op is a nonprofit organization. It has a long history of doing social work and promoting political self-determination. It's adopted various boycotts over the years, but in 2010, the board voted by consensus to boycott Israeli goods. More than a year later, 5 of the 22,000 members sued 16 volunteer board members, those who passed the boycott and those who were sitting on the board when the suit was brought. They claimed they breached their fiduciary duties and acted beyond their authority. The case seeks to end the boycott as well as personal damages against the 16 individuals. 6 months before the lawsuit was filed, the Israeli Consul General to the Pacific Northwest, based in San Francisco, traveled to Olympia, Washington, to meet with the co-chairs of Stand With Us Northwest, an attorney representing the plaintiffs, and some Olympia activists. Stand With Us is a nonprofit whose mission is to support Israel around the world. It's one of many groups trying to suppress speech critical of the Israeli government in the U.S. It maintains dossiers on people who advocate for Palestinian rights, including some of us here. Not long after that meeting, nearly a year after the board had passed the boycott, the five co-op members sent a letter opposing the boycott and threatening to sue the 16 board members unless they rescinded the boycott immediately, and threatened that they would be held personally liable and that the process would become considerably more complicated, burdensome, and expensive. The boycott, again, was passed in 2010. This was 6 years ago. The board responded by asking them to specify how they had violated the co-op's governing documents and by inviting them to initiate a ballot process to put proposals to a membership vote as provided by the bylaws. They refused to do so and instead filed a lawsuit. Right after the lawsuit was filed, Stand With Us Northwest listed it as an agenda item for its executive committee meeting under the category of project status. It posted online that Stand With Us filed the lawsuit against the Olympia Food Co-op and that it was a byproduct of the partnership between Stand With Us and the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs, spearheaded by Israeli Deputy Foreign Minister Danny Ayalon. When Danny Ayalon was asked if the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs was involved in the lawsuit, he responded, quote, "It's very important to make use of every means at our disposal, mainly legal means. And it's true, we are using this organization, Stand With Us, to amplify our power." CCR and our co-counsel in Seattle represent the board members who were sued, and several years ago we filed what's called an anti-SLAPP motion. SLAPP is a strategic lawsuit against public participation, and about half the states in this country have laws to deter the abuse of courts to chill free speech. The law permits early dismissal of the suit when it challenges public statements on an issue of public concern. It provides costs and attorney's fees, and in Washington state, it provided $10,000 damage award for each defendant. The trial court dismissed the case as a SLAPP, finding it was meritless. It held the board had the authority to pass the boycott and awarded $10,000 to each of the 16 defendants. Plaintiffs appealed, the appeals court affirmed, and then they petitioned to the Washington Supreme Court. The Washington Supreme Court struck down the anti-SLAPP statute last year as unconstitutional, finding that it violated a right to jury trial under the Washington Constitution and remanded the case back to the trial court. So this year, we are back in the trial court again. Nearly 5 years after the suit was first brought, we moved to dismiss the case again, arguing that the boycott was permitted under the governing documents of the co-op, which a trial court previously and the appellate court had already decided was right, and the motion to dismiss, unfortunately, was denied. So the case goes on. Meanwhile, the board members, only one of whom is actually still a board member, have been subject to the burden of discovery, and the intimidation and harassment of this meritless lawsuit continues. But the Olympia Food Co-op's boycott of Israel still goes on. These are not isolated cases, but just two of numerous incidents in which people who dare to speak out for Palestinian rights are attacked. In September, CCR and our partner Palestine Legal issued this report entitled The Palestine Exception to Free Speech, a Movement Under Attack in the US. It documents widespread and growing efforts in the US to punish and silence protected advocacy on behalf of Palestinian rights and speech that is critical of Israel, including BDS, of course. It details the tactics as well as many case studies, and it's available on both of our websites, ccrjustice.org and palestinelegal.org. And I'll have materials later on the tables in the other room. Last year, Palestine Legal responded to 240 incidents of suppression, including baseless legal complaints, administrative disciplinary actions, bureaucratic barriers, false accusations of terrorism and anti-Semitism, etc. 80% of those incidents targeted students and professors on 75 different campuses. And this is just the tip of the iceberg of the suppression that's going on. At schools around the country, students are investigated for protests. When they do mock eviction flyering to raise awareness about home demolitions, charges inevitably follow that they were targeting Jewish dorm rooms. These charges have never been substantiated, but of course lead to school and have sometimes even criminal investigations. The Irvine 11 were criminally convicted for disrupting a meeting, for walking out of a speech by then Israeli ambassador to the US, Michael Oren. Several schools have faced Title VI complaints by the Zionist Organization of America, claiming essentially that advocacy on campus for Palestinian rights creates an anti-Semitic hostile environment. Even though decisions dismissing the complaints have said that the First Amendment protected expression alleged can't support a Title VI violation, these complaints are still being filed, and universities respond by conducting investigations and cracking down on speech. These attacks often follow pressure or complaints from groups not only the ZOA, the Brandeis Center, the Amcha Initiative, Shrat Hadin, Stand With Us, the Simon Wiesenthal Center, the Anti-Defamation League, etc. Netanyahu has launched a full attack on BDS, and Israel has declared it's the biggest threat it faces. Millions and millions of dollars are being spent to combat criticism of Israel and BDS in particular. Divestment resolutions on campuses all over the country have faced opposition, not on their merits, but because of claims they're anti-Semitic. When the American Studies Association passed a resolution to endorse the call for boycott of Israeli academic institutions, they received death threats. Shrat Hadin, the Israeli Law Center, threatened to sue them if they didn't end the boycott. Shrat Hadin admits that it takes direction on which cases to pursue and receives evidence from Mossad and Israel's National Security Council. Also, in response to the ASA resolution, legislatures around the country proposed bills to take away state funding from colleges that used any state aid to fund any academic organization that advocated a boycott of Israel. Mobilization prevented those bills from being passed, but now there's a new slate of anti-boycott legislation that's been introduced in about 15 states. Some states, as was mentioned earlier, have passed non-binding resolutions condemning BDS, but those have no legal effect. But last year, Illinois passed a law requiring the establishment of a blacklist of foreign companies that boycott Israel and compels the state pension fund to divest from those companies. Florida passed a similar bill this year, which is awaiting signature by the governor. It also prevents state contracts with any such companies if the contract's over $1 million. New York has similar legislation pending that's even worse than those. Congress has introduced legislation to try to protect these kinds of state laws from federal preemption challenges, but of course, they can't prevent a First Amendment challenge. Anti-boycott provisions made their way into the Federal Trade Promotions Authority law, making it a principal trade objective of the United States to discourage BDS from Israel and Israel-controlled territories. The Obama administration, subsequently reiterated the position that it does not support settlements for what that's worth. You can find out more about legislative anti-boycott legislation at righttoboycott.org. Anti-BDS legislation isn't only in the US, of course. Israel itself has an anti-boycott damages law, and France has even criminalized BDS. Someone was arrested last week for wearing a BDS t-shirt. These attacks are an extension of Israel's oppression of Palestinians living under occupation, under siege, under apartheid, and under attack. When there's no defense, the tactic is to try to stop the debate by intimidating and attacking your opponent. So Israel and its apologists are also attacking those standing up for Palestinian rights, wherever they are. Free speech is crucial to free inquiry, open debate, and the functioning of our democracy, especially at our universities, where open debate on issues of public concern tends to lead our nation's consciousness. Campus activism helped turn the tides of the Vietnam War and South African apartheid, and will eventually do the same here. The mounting repression against those who speak out against Israel's occupation and other violations of international law illustrates the power the movement for Palestinian rights has to expose those abuses and eventually bring them to an end. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maria. I've been asked to sit down and speak from this mic while the new mic gets corrected. So and hopefully we won't have any more ins and outs of... Should I
speak from here too?
I think it'll be okay. It's up to you, though. But let me introduce you first. Okay. As we heard this morning, one manifestation of Israel's influence on this country is the failure of government agencies not only to guard the interests of American citizens, but to even enforce the law. Our next speaker, Susan Abu Hawa, is one of the plaintiffs in a lawsuit against the U.S. Treasury Department for allowing tax-deductible contributions to go to illegal Israeli settlements. The attorney who filed that and another lawsuit against Sheldon Adelson, Friends of the IDF, and others who actually make those contributions is here with us today. And I'd like to ask Martin McMahon, who's no relation to me as far as I know, to stand up so people will know who he is if they want to talk to him more about the details of these cases. So he'll be available for the rest of the afternoon for those of you who want to speak to him. Thank you. Thank you.
Nothing would be possible without brave plaintiffs like Susan who's coming up. She's a wonderful woman, and she represents some great people that are still trying to fight for Palestinian rights.
Thank you. And I'd like to add to that Susan Abu Hawa is a wonderful novelist, poet, and essayist. Her debut novel, Mornings in Jenin, became an instant international bestseller and was translated into 27 languages. Her most recent novel, The Blue Between Sky and Water, has likewise been translated into 26 languages thus far, and she'll be signing copies of her book in the exhibition hall following this panel. Susan's first poetry collection, My Voice Sought the Wind, was published in 2013, and she has contributed to several anthologies. Her essays and political commentary have appeared in print, radio, and digital media internationally. In 2001, before she left a career in neuroscience research to become a full-time writer, Susan founded Playgrounds for Palestine, a children's organization dedicated to upholding the right to play for Palestinian children. Last July, at the Allenby Bridge in Jordan, Israel denied her entry to Palestine, where she had planned to build 2 new playgrounds and visit possible new sites. Somehow, I suspect she will not be deterred. It's a great pleasure to introduce Susan Abu Hawa.
So thank you to the Washington Report and to all of you for being here. And especially to you, Martin McMahon. It's an honor to share the stage with my comrades, Maria and Tarek and Huwaida. And listening to Tarek and Maria just now makes me feel like we are winning. As you heard, I'm here because I'm a plaintiff in Martin's lawsuit. But I'm not a lawyer, I'm a writer. and I'm all about narrative. So I'm going to talk about why I joined this lawsuit. Because I think bringing it back to Palestine, no matter how much we know about it, is always still important. So first, to the question at hand, whether Israel's influence is good or not for the United States. I think the answer to that largely depends on which United States we're talking about. There's the US of the Civil Rights Movement and Dr. King, and then there's the US of the Klan and the Grand Wizards. There's the US of revolutionaries and warriors like Malcolm, Harriet Tubman, Crazy Horse, Black Hawk, Geronimo, Huey Newton, Angela Davis, Kwame Ture. And then there are the architects of the financial crisis who made off with billions of dollars in people's lost homes and lost savings. There's the US of intellectual giants like W.E.B. Du Bois, Howard Zinn, Alice Walker, Edward Said, Chomsky. And then there are the likes of Friedman and Fox News. The United States, I'm briefly going to touch on, belongs to the latter grouping. It is of some of the wealthiest, most privileged Americans, like the Falic family. I assume it's not pronounced phallic. The Schottenstein family, owners of American Eagle Outfitters, the Book family, owners of Jet Support Systems, who funnel billions of tax-exempt money to finance the persistent, incremental theft of Palestine. The theft of another people's ancestral lands, of our homes, our history and heritage. The theft of our culture, our food, our memories, our cemeteries, our churches, our mosques, our orchards, our olive groves. All so they who have so much can also have an extra country. So that every Jewish person in the world may be accorded an entitlement to dual citizenship, one in their own ancestral homeland and one in mine. This colonial enterprise, is that coming up? This colonial enterprise of population change can be visualized through maps showing the expropriation and the dramatic transfer of land ownership, such that the native sons and daughters of Palestine are now relegated to what amounts to less than 11% of our historic homeland. Arranged as an apartheid, waterless archipelago of ghettos. But, as Grant showed us this morning, such images of this settler colonial reality has not permeated US popular imagination, principally because US media gives disproportionate platform to Zionist voices, who repeat tired mantras about terrorism to manufacture fear and its resultant alignment of loyalties. Tired mantras about negotiations and peace overtures living side by side, lofty and emotional verbiage that's carefully orchestrated precisely for American ears in order to create a false narrative of parity, one that paints a highly militarized colonial enterprise as a victim of the principally unarmed, defenseless, and besieged native population that they occupy. It is an extraordinary and breathtaking inversion of the historic and forensic record. So, while a mythical narrative of biblical proportions dominates US airways, newspapers, radio, film, and literature, I'd like to give you a glimpse of what they're actually doing. And these actions are predicated on an ideology explicitly articulated by Zionists in the highest offices, particularly to each other, and often when they think no one is listening. It is a language of supremacy, of the wholesale negation of another people's humanity. It is replete with various permutations of the word colonize, and with words like transfer. From the very beginning, Theodore Herzl said, "Spirit the penniless," that the removal of the poor must be carried out discreetly. Ze'ev Jabotinsky, a founding member of Zionism, did not mince words. He said, "Zionism is a colonizing adventure." Raphael Itan, who we heard about earlier today, said, When we have settled the land, all the Arabs will be able to do about it will be to scurry around like drugged cockroaches in a bottle. And the current Israeli prime minister, in a moment when he thought no one was listening, said Israel should have exploited the repression of demonstrations in China when world attention focused on that country in order to carry out mass expulsions among the Arabs of the territories. And Yitzhak Rabin, the Nobel laureate and father of Break Palestinian Bones doctrine, said Israel will create in the course of the next 10 to 20 years conditions which would attract the voluntary migrations of Palestinians. Rabin uttered those words in the 1980s, and indeed Israel has created those conditions. Here is a glimpse of what he was talking about, and Grant, if you could play that, please. As with all colonial projects, Yitzhak Rabin, the Nobel laureate and father. What is that? That's my own voice. Just played back to me. As with all colonial projects, you know, this always happens. It's Murphy's Law. A foundational aim is to create a docile, subjugated native population without rights or without recourse. A broken humanity that's good for cheap labor. They start terrorizing us at a young age. At any given time, Israel typically holds hundreds of Palestinian children in administrative detention, where they are interrogated and tortured without charge, without trial, without their parents, without a lawyer, without an advocate. They're often kidnapped on their way to and from school, playing in the streets, throwing rocks at tanks, as they have a right to do, or pulled from their beds and dragged away in the middle of the night. They're shot and murdered or maimed wherever they stand. Israel systematically targets Palestinian education. They bomb schools directly, close them down regularly, raid them, fire on students, often inside their classrooms. They impede the ability of students and teachers to physically reach their classrooms. In addition to checkpoints, road barriers, and closures, violent settlers often prevent young and old alike from reaching their destinations, whether it's school, work, shopping, a family visit, a funeral, a field, a mosque or a church, a wedding, or any place to be in any moment to complete a day of living. They demolish our homes one by one, evict whole families, whole neighborhoods. Israel is perhaps the only nation in the world that creates homelessness as a matter of national policy. At the same time that native families are pushed out, Jewish foreigners are imported from all over the world to take their place. Since 1967, 25,000 Palestinian homes have been destroyed, internally displacing over 200,000 Palestinians. 15,000 of those homes were demolished since the signing of the Oslo Accords in '93. And since that year, 53,000 new Jewish settler homes have been built on land confiscated from Palestinians. They destroy our precious, ancient olive trees that we have loved and nurtured for centuries, and which have sustained and defined so much of our lives in return. Nearly 1 million olive trees have been uprooted, cut, burned, a lone statistic, a Holocaust in itself, a life-giving earth transformed into a graveyard for broken and burned trees. They steal Palestinian water, pump it out from aquifers beneath Palestinian land, and then they allocate it on the basis of religious affiliation. What Palestinians are accorded of their own water is sold to them at prices several-fold more compared with what Jews in the same area are charged. A 2013 Al-Haq report demonstrated how 550,000 illegal Jewish settlers use 5 times more water than the 2.6 million Palestinians in the same area. Palestinian access to water is further limited by Israel's denial of Palestinian water development. It is nearly impossible for us to get permission to dig new wells. And further, what wells and cisterns already exist are frequently damaged or destroyed by Israel. The assault on Gaza's drinking water is so severe that 90% of the groundwater in Gaza now is unfit for human consumption. Israel rules with color-coded ID cards, with massive surveillance of voice data, of movements, of habits, of hopes and secrets. They have color-coded license plates and segregated roads and segregated buses. Implementation of Israeli apartheid goes to the smallest details of life, including even cell phone coverage. While Israeli settlers in the 67 occupied territories enjoy 3G and 4G coverage, Palestinians are limited to 2G, a limitation with massive economic implications designed to perpetuate an economic dependency on Israel. And yet, in the United States, financial support of such policies are cataloged as charitable. So much of this system of ethno-religious supremacy has been made possible by external funding, both governmental and an estimated 30,000 non-governmental so-called charitable organizations. In the US, tax-exempt groups have poured billions of dollars into subsidizing population change. A 2002 study by Dr. Thomas Stauffer estimated that $50 to $60 billion had been transferred from the US charities to Israel over a 20-year period from 1980 to 2002. And similarly shocking numbers were revealed in a 2013 study by the Forward that looked at 3,600 US tax-exempt groups funneling money to Israel. A Haaretz investigation reported in a 4-year period between 2009 and 2013 that 50 US tax-exempt organizations alone funneled more than $220 million to exclusively Jewish settlements in Palestine. The Hebron Fund that you see is one example. This is a Brooklyn-based group that provides approximately half of the Hebron settler community's funding. Between 2009 and 2014, it transferred $5.7 million to the settler community of just a few hundred individuals who live in the midst of 220,000 Palestinians. This small but heavily armed and guarded settler outpost among nearly 250,000 Palestinians has acted as a paramilitary force, terrorizing local inhabitants into leaving. This community further has well-documented connections to terrorism and human rights abuses. They have been accused of crimes including theft, harassment, murder, assault, destruction of property. They've been involved in gunfire, attempts to run people over, poisoning of a water well, breaking into homes, spilling of hot liquid on the face of a Palestinian, and the killing of a young Palestinian girl. Another organization is this one, Hanenu. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly. I don't really care. Donations to this organization go primarily to legal aid and family support for accused, confessed, or convicted Jewish terrorists. Among their beneficiaries was Ami Popper, who murdered 7 Palestinian laborers in 1990. He pulled them out, lined them up, and shot them along a wall. They've provided support for members of a terrorist underground that attempted to detonate a bomb at a girls' school in East Jerusalem in 2002. Other high-profile accused or convicted terrorists who've received funding from Hanenu include the settlers who kidnapped, beat, tortured, and then burned alive 16-year-old Mohammed Abu Khdeir from Shafat in 2014. Also, the settlers who firebombed the home of the Dawabshe family, killing 18-month-old Ali, and along with both of his parents, and severely burning his older brother. Another organization is the Fund of Israel. This is an umbrella charity that operates out of a textile company that's owned by the Marcus brothers in the Manhattan Garment District. It has received money from the likes of Ace Greenberg, Kirk Douglas, Michael Milken, the junk bond king. In 2014 alone, they sent $25 million to Israel. Philip Weiss, who's with us today, reported in Mondoweiss that CFI provides funding to a yeshiva that's headed by Rabbis Shapira and Elitzur. These guys co-authored a book called The King's Torah. in which they make it clear that the commandment, thou shalt not kill, applies only to Jews who kill Jews. The bulk of the text in this book is a rabbinical instruction manual explaining the ways of kosher murder for non-Jews. Non-Jews, the book explains, are uncompassionate by nature, and therefore attacking them may, quote, curb their evil inclinations. The book permits the killing of infants and children of non-Jews since, quote, it is clear that they will grow up to harm us. And these are things that are funded by U.S. tax-exempt dollars. In the interest of time, I think I'm going to skip through some of these. These are only a few examples in a large body of evidence showing how financial transactions from tax-exempt organizations are used to fund ethno-religious supremacy and entitlement, with its consequent displacement and destruction of native Palestinian life. It does not include a whole other ecosystem of synagogue and church giving to Israel. So I think the more appropriate question to ask today is whether specific actions, protocols, laws, and political adventures bend our collective human experience toward justice, toward universal dignity, and moral evolution. The forcible removal of an entire nation, a deeply rooted people, in order to replace them with others from around the world, people whom the new state deems a better form of human, is itself a form of moral regression. European Zionists conquered Palestine, a place that already had an ancient history, that had produced an extensive society whose character formed organically over thousands of years of documented habitation, conquests, pilgrimages, births of religions, religious conversions, marriages, rapes, enslavement, settlements, wars, crusade, commerce, travel, and natural migrations. Of known tribes like the Canaanites, the Philistines, the Mamluks, Assyrians, Hebrews, the Romans, they all passed through our lands and became of us as we became of them. And we never left. We were always there, until the turn of the century when European Zionists arrived with guns and hatred and made of us a homeless refugee people, an exiled and an occupied, terrorized people. We were and we remain the children of that patch of earth, of that history. We belong to that place where are buried our parents and grandparents and great-grandparents and on down the line. We did not arrive there a few years ago from Poland and Belarus or Russia or Florida, France, England, Germany, or any other place from which the vast majorities of Israelis hail. We do not have hundreds of years of European history, of documented life and achievement in Europe, the Americas, and elsewhere. And the whole world knows it. But our humanity is nothing to them. It is as if we are vermin in the eyes of American Zionists financing the destruction of Palestine. The dismantling of our society is happening today in 2016. Missed a whole decade. That's why I joined Martin McMahon's initiative to sue the US Treasury so that they might investigate these organizations, so that my American compatriots might be moved to shut them down. I joined this lawsuit because I see it as a way to confront power when we are mostly powerless, when we are so outgunned, outmoneyed, outmaneuvered, outconnected. I joined because I believe that confronting power with truth is the least one can do with the privilege we have. When so many who are a fraction of my age are risking their young lives to confront heavily armed soldiers with rocks, when grown men and women with nothing but their bellies to protest waste away as hunger forces the body to eat itself. I joined this lawsuit because I believe in the United States of the Civil War heroes, of its warriors and intellectuals, because the cause of Palestine is squarely in the categories of this America. I will close with one last quote by Zeev Jabotinsky, who, despite his abhorrent supremacist ideas, clearly understood something fundamental about Palestinians. He said this about us: "They look upon Palestine with the same instinctive love and true favor the Aztecs looked upon Mexico, or any Sioux looked upon his prairie. Palestine will remain for the Palestinians not a borderland, but their birthplace, the center and basis of their own national existence. But unlike the destruction of the Aztecs and the Sioux, we are not yet outnumbered. Our anguish is audible to global civil society. And the moment portending our existential peril is now. So the question then for this audience is, which United States do we want to prevail?" Thank you.
Thank you so much, Susan. And again, she'll be signing her books after this panel in the exhibition hall. Over the years, countless lawsuits have been filed against Iran for terrorist attacks it allegedly made possible. These lawsuits have not accused Iran of directly killing Americans, but rather of providing material support to Hamas, Hezbollah, the Khobar Tower bombers, you name it. Just last month, in fact, 367, I counted, family members and estates sued Iran for providing material support for the killing or injuring of Americans, including soldiers, in Iraq. As if Iran, not the US, hadn't been the one to invade that country. Israel, on the other hand, has directly killed and injured Americans. From the crew of the USS Liberty in 1967, 37 Americans killed, 171 wounded in international waters, to 23-year-old nonviolent activist Rachel Corrie, killed 13 years ago this past Wednesday, days before we invaded Iraq. And 18-year-old Fergan Dogan, a passenger on the humanitarian vessel Mavi Marmara, who was killed 6 years ago. The UN Human Rights Council described his killing as a, quote, summary execution by Israeli commandos who boarded the unarmed ship, also in international waters. Our final speaker, Huwaida Araf, was a passenger on the Challenger 1, one of the other vessels in that 2010 Gaza flotilla. She is one of 4 Challenger passengers who are suing the State of Israel and 4 of its ministries for torture, cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment, arbitrary arrest and detention, assault and battery, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Huwaida is a Palestinian-American lawyer and human rights advocate. As the daughter of an Israeli-born Palestinian, she is also a citizen of Israel. She received her bachelor's degree from the University of Michigan and her Juris Doctor from the American University Washington College of Law, where she focused on international human rights and humanitarian law. In 2001, Huwaida co-founded the International Solidarity Movement, or ISM, for which Rachel Corrie was volunteering when she was crushed to death by an Israeli bulldozer. Huwaida is co-editor of the book Peace Under Fire, Israel, Palestine, and the International Solidarity Movement, an organization which has twice been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. Huwaida was one of the initiators and organizers of a delegation of American lawyers to Gaza in February 2009 and co-authored the report on their findings, Onslaught, Israel's Attack on Gaza and the Rule of Law. She is the former chairperson of the Free Gaza Movement and from August to December 2008 led 5 successful sea voyages to the Gaza Strip to confront and challenge Israel's illegal blockade. Huwaida was one of the primary organizers of the Gaza Freedom Flotilla, which Israeli forces lethally attacked on May 31st, 2010. Please join me in welcoming Huwaida Araf.
Thank you, Janet. Thanks to the Washington Report for inviting me again, and thanks to all of you for being here. I must admit, I am now a little intimidated to go after all these wonderful speakers, especially since I'm a little out of my element here. I usually speak kind of as a human rights activist about what's happening in Palestine, what we're doing about it. Sometimes I'm called to speak as a lawyer about some legal issues implicated, but today I'm not speaking as either one of those because the topic here is pending litigation. It's rather sensitive, and I'm not the lawyer on the case, but rather a plaintiff, and one of my lawyers told me, don't speak about the legal issues. I'm like, well, what am I going to speak about then? And last year when I spoke, I had my 6-month-old daughter with me, and she just captivated the audience and really added to my talk, and nobody paid attention to what I said, and I could really use her right now. But she had other plans this weekend, so she's not here. No, I will try not to bore you. That won't be that bad, but if you could just understand that there are probably some things that I won't be able to talk about. Okay, so by way of brief background, as Janet already said in my introduction, and some of you already know, I was one of the organizers of the Gaza Freedom Flotilla in 2010, and I was one of the passengers. The Gaza Freedom Flotilla sought to challenge Israel's illegal blockade on Gaza. And to do that, we organized 7 ships carrying over 700 people from over 36 countries and over 10,000 tons of urgently needed materials in Gaza. I was on the Challenger 1, which was a small US flagged vessel. It was sailing very close to the bigger ship, the Mavi Marmara, which was carrying a bulk of the passengers. On the night of May 30th into May 31st, I was in the wheelhouse of the Challenger 1. And around midnight, the Israeli Navy contacted us. And they proceeded to ask us questions about who we were, what our vessel numbers were, where we came from, where we were heading. And the captains of the various ships answered these questions, so they knew very clearly who we were. Then I kind of took over in speaking on behalf of the flotilla. And I repeatedly told the Israeli Navy that we are unarmed civilians. We are carrying only humanitarian aid for the people of Gaza who are under an illegal blockade. We are not going to near Israeli waters. We're going from international waters into Gaza's territorial waters. We constitute no threat to the state of Israel or its armed forces. Do not use force against us. And I repeated that we are unarmed civilians. Do not use force against us. At about 1:30 in the morning, the communication from the Israeli Navy stopped. And about 3 hours later, we heard shooting. It was still the dead of night. There was shooting going on all around us. I went out onto the deck, and I could see helicopters overhead and Israeli Zodiacs, gunships. The Mavi Marmara was the first boat to come under attack. Our ship sped off. We were hoping to delay the boarding of our ship at least until we could get word out on our satellite phones that we were under attack. But the Israeli ships quickly overtook us, at least 2 Zodiacs filled with armed, masked men trying to board our boat. And I remember myself holding up my arms saying, stay away from us. This is an American ship where only civilians do not come on board. And I was screaming, this is an American ship, stay away from us. And then chaos ensued. They threw sound bombs. I looked at one of my colleagues. She had blood all over her face. I don't know what had happened to her. I was thrown down to the ground. My face was smashed into a deck full of glass, and as a soldier stepped on my head, others were trying to get my hands cuffed behind my back. When I was finally cuffed, they dragged me to one end of the ship, pinned me down and put a sack over my head. as they were searching my body and went into my pants looking for any media equipment they had on me. Primarily, they were looking for our cameras and our phones, and they indeed succeeded in taking those away from us. Our boat was eventually taken to the now Israeli port of Ashdod, where violence continued. I was carried off the ship, as were a lot of my colleagues, by our hands and feet, thrown to the ground. I was later detained for hours, interrogated, and towards the end of the day was physically abused to the point where I passed out and was taken to a hospital. But what happened to me, to us on that Challenger, was nothing in comparison to what happened to our colleagues on the Mavi Marmara, in which 9 of our colleagues were shot dead. One was lethally injured and passed away 4 years later. And it pales in comparison to what's happening to the people of Palestine every single day, to what's happening to the people of Gaza, the very situation that we were attempting to draw attention to with our action. Nevertheless, it wasn't a minor thing, and we are thankful to be alive. When we first founded the International Solidarity Movement, we did it believing that, Israel kills Palestinians, they have a free hand to do so, no one has ever held Israel accountable for killing Palestinians, but Israel does not want to kill internationals. It doesn't look good for them. Internationals have governments which will stand up for them, at least try to hold Israel accountable. But then, as Janet mentioned, 13 years ago, they killed our colleague Rachel Corrie in Gaza in a brutal way, ran her over with a huge armored bulldozer. And a few weeks later, they killed another foreign national, Tom Herndal, a UK citizen. He laid in a coma for 9 months before he died from a bullet wound to the back of the head. And then a month after that, they killed a British journalist, James Miller. They got some bad PR, but they weren't held accountable. For Tom Herndal's death, because his parents went after, really, not only his parents, because also Rachel Corrie's parents were very active in this. But Tom Herndal's parents had a bit of support from their government, and in a sense, it pressured Israel a little bit to arrest the soldier that shot Tom, in a sense, to hold him out as, the sacrificial lamb, did nothing to address the total impunity with which the Israeli military operates, or the government that, gives those orders and uses kind of these policies. It's a matter of national policy. So they put this soldier on trial. He spent a few years in jail, was released early. The American government promised Rachel Corrie's parents that the Israeli government would conduct an independent, impartial investigation into what happened. That never happened. So there was no one ever held accountable, and the culture of impunity continues. In terms of the flotilla, I think something that Israel did not expect was that there was a backlash of sorts amongst the people of the world. Tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people around the world marched in protest. Artists that were supposed to perform in Israel canceled their performances. There were different unions and protests at ports because Israel attacked our ship and was not letting ships into Gaza, that they tried to block Israeli ships coming to various ports in Oakland and in Sweden. And so the people reacted, and I think that was and remains significant. In addition, we, the people that planned the flotilla, we did not in any way, it was traumatizing in a sense what happened, but we made a decision that we were not going to let this violence deter us. And we went on to plan another flotilla. At the same time, we strategized and gathered lawyers from all over the world to try to decide how we were going to pursue legal action. So this comes to a little bit of the legal part of my talk. One of the things that we did is assemble a file for the International Criminal Court. The International Criminal Court did not open an investigation as a result of a file submitted from the lawyers representing the plaintiffs. But we also appealed to the island of the Comoros. Now, the Mavi Marmara ship was flagged in the Comoros, and the Comoros is a signatory to the Rome Statute of the ICC. And in 2013, the island of the Comoros did request that the prosecutor open an investigation into the attack on the Mavi Marmara and the Freedom Flotilla, and the prosecutor did do so. And the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court came back with a decision that there was evidence showing that war crimes was committed in that flotilla attack, but unfortunately decided that the events did not meet the threshold, the gravity threshold. It wasn't grave enough to merit further ICC involvement, and she decided to close the case. Now, the Comoros Islands appealed that decision to what's called the pretrial chamber, and surprisingly, we were surprised, but the pretrial chamber did issue a decision calling on the prosecutor to reconsider her decision, saying that she overlooked some significant matters and called on her to reopen the matter, which she and her office tried to appeal. They tried to appeal that decision, and the appeals chamber last year came back and actually they did not accept her appeal, and therefore the decision of the pretrial chamber stands that she needs to take another look at this case. Now, we don't know what she's going to do. She might, we hope she doesn't, but she might find another way to close the case, but that case before the International Criminal Court is still open. Some passengers filed cases in various countries. In Spain, we had 3 Spanish citizens on the flotilla, and they filed the lawsuits. In November of 2015, so just a few months ago, a Spanish National Court judge instructed the Spanish police to notify him if any of the 7, they named 7 officials as guilty, they accused of war crimes. If any of these 7 stepped foot into Spain, that he should be notified, that the police should be notified in order for these people to be detained and to undergo questioning in connection with this lawsuit. Unfortunately, over the last few years, Spain has really gutted its universal jurisdiction laws. It used to have a very vibrant universal jurisdiction law. In fact, it is the laws that allowed for the, I think it was 1998, where Augusto Pinochet was arrested in London and extradited to Spain to stand trial. But in 2009, a Spanish judge agreed to open an investigation or to actually pursue a case against the perpetrators of a 2002 bombing attack on Gaza. And as a result of that, so where you have a potential of Israeli officials being investigated for war crimes in Spain, the foreign minister of Spain at the time promised the Israelis that this would be looked into, that this would not be allowed to happen, and indeed, only a few months later, Spain's universal jurisdiction law was gutted. So now it stands that in order to pursue a case in Spain, not only must a Spanish citizen be involved, be a victim of the abuse before it could be anybody. I mean, the whole theory of universal jurisdiction is that there are some crimes that are so heinous that any government, any state, any court should be able to take jurisdiction over these war criminals so that these people can be stopped. But now in Spain and in many other countries that have gutted their universal jurisdiction laws as a result of political pressure, in Spain, a Spaniard has to be involved and the person, the accused, has to be on Spanish soil, which did not limit the ability to still prosecute for this case, for the flotilla, because the thought was there were Spaniards involved, and if any of these people set foot in Spain, they should be arrested. But following this ruling, a spokesperson for the Israeli Foreign Ministry told the media, "We're working with the Spanish authorities to get this canceled, and we hope it will be resolved soon." And a month later, the Spanish High Court annulled this decision of this judge and removed the 7 officials from the police database. The attorney for the 3 Spanish victims appealed Unfortunately, not only did the appellate court in Spain uphold the dismissal, but it also imposed costs on the victims, which is kind of unprecedented. The attorney is appealing now to the Spanish Constitutional Court, and if he fails there, he plans to take it all the way up to the European Court of Human Rights. So we're not stopping there. In the UK, in January 2015, lawyers also presented a complaint to police who are gathering evidence now with a view to deciding if certain Israeli accused officials, basically if they set foot in the UK, if they should be arrested. So there is an ongoing case in the United Kingdom. The United States. So the precedent here hasn't been so great. After we were attacked, we tried to work with the US government a lot through the embassy, the State Department, to try to get answers as to what happened to us, to try to get some kind of help, to try to get, I mean, very basic, to try to get some of our things back. Everything was taken from us, our money, our wallets, our cameras, our laptops, everything, just to get some of our things back, and that never happened. The Center for Constitutional Rights has been, over the last few years since the attack, trying to, through the Freedom of Information Act, get a lot of documents from the US government as to what they knew in relation to the attack on the flotilla, both before, after, and this has resulted in somewhere over 15,000 pages of redacted documents. But in terms of pursuing legal action, Maria actually has been at the forefront of trying to hold Israelis accountable for grave abuses of human rights when it comes to Rachel Corrie against the Caterpillar Corporation, and against for Palestinian also victims. Some of the cases were mentioned here: Belhas v. Yalon, Matar v. Dictor. Both of those cases were against Israelis for their involvement in war crimes. In Belhas v. Yalon, it was for the 1996 attack on a UN refugee base camp in Lebanon. With Avi Dictor, Matar v. Dictor, it was for 2002 bombing of an apartment building in Gaza, which killed 15 people, including 8 children. Both of those cases, unfortunately, were dismissed based on sovereign immunity, saying that these officials are entitled to immunity. And I see the red light has gone on. Let me go quickly to our case today. We, on January 12, 2016, myself and 3 others, did institute a civil action for compensation against the State of Israel. So not against an official, but against the State of Israel and a number of named ministries. Our jurisdictional claim is the Foreign Sovereign Immunity Act, which in general gives immunity to foreign states because, the politics of this country, they don't want, to create a situation where the politics or the action of foreign states are litigated in US courts. Okay, that is understandable, but there are some exceptions to that immunity, and we believe that our case fits very clearly into one of these exceptions. One of the exceptions that's found in under 1605A5 of the Foreign Sovereign Immunities Act, which says that a foreign state shall not be immune from the jurisdiction of the courts of the United States in a case in which money damages are sought against a foreign state for personal injury or death, or damage to or loss of property occurring in the United States. Our ship was flying a US flag for all intents and purposes. It was US territory on the high seas. Therefore, immunity does not apply. Now, what unfortunately the United States government has been doing, and there's another case, sorry, I forgot to mention, that has been instituted only a few months before in California for the death of Furkan Dugan, who was a United States citizen executed on the Mavi Marmara. Executed because the UN Fact-Finding Commission found that he was shot 5 times, once in the face at point-blank range, likely when he was laying on his back, already down. And what happened when that UN fact-finding mission report came before the UN Human Rights Council for a vote, the United States, which had one of its citizens executed, was the only country to vote not to approve that report. If we're talking about the influence of the US lobby or Israel and its relationship with the United States, is it good for America when it causes America to take such shameful positions against the rights and lives of its own citizens? That cannot be good for America. But that case is also ongoing in California, and what Israel recently sent a letter to the United States government asking for what's called a suggestion of immunity, asking the United States to submit a letter to the US court saying that they recommend immunity for Ehud Barak, who's the individual being sued in California. And it is indeed what they have done in these past cases that have been dismissed based on sovereign immunity. Now, the United States, to the best of my knowledge, has not submitted this letter yet. It is ongoing. The lawyers on that case are currently responding to Barak's motion to dismiss. In terms of our case, it is likely they will do the same thing. They are not entitled to immunity. What the government of Israel, in their letter, said that this is an orchestrated and politically motivated effort to invoke and abuse the judicial systems of various countries to achieve political ends, trying to accuse basically us, trying to accuse Furkan Dugan's parents of politically motivated reasons for this lawsuit, as opposed to seeking justice for lost loved ones and for gross abuse that we face at the hands of Israel. If this is politically motivated, is it politically motivated to seek justice for Eric Garner, to seek justice for Sandra Bland, to seek justice for Freddie Gray? Those same people or that same mindset would say that this is politically motivated. What's political about it is to say that some people are entitled to justice based on the color of their skin and others are not, or their race or their ethnicity, and that is unacceptable. It's not politically motivated in any other sense, because freedom for Palestine is not going to be won in US courtrooms. It is going to be won by the people marching in the streets in Palestine, by the people from all over the world marching with them, by the people getting on boats, by the students here and around the world, and others that are taking up BDS. These are the ways that we, the people of the world, are going to hold Israel accountable. It is not going to be in the courtrooms. But what we seek from our courts is to say that our lives are important and that foreign governments cannot abuse and kill, execute people, and not face justice for it. Because if the United States government submits a letter granting immunity to Israel for attacking Americans on US soil, then who is safe and who is next? And people are going to continue to go. In fact, there is an all-women's boat being planned right now to sail to Gaza. And there's a representative of the women's boat to Gaza here somewhere. Susan, are you in the room? Oh, if you want to talk to her about the women's boat and supporting that, the effort of the people won't stop. But we definitely need to use the courts to at least deter or to provide some kind of deterrence, because otherwise, as we've seen, when there is no deterrence, the violence continues. And if there is no accountability, what is to stop Israel? And that's a true danger here. It remains to be seen, but as we hope that our national courts will be a place where we can get justice, but despite that, we will keep on. We will keep on. We keep on marching and we keep on sailing.
Well, I'd like to thank our inspiring panelists for a fabulous session today. And we are running a little late, so I'm going to propose that we take a 15-minute break and then come back for a very exciting second keynote address and our final panel of the day. So let's 15 minutes and then we'll come back. Thank you so much.